Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for the Monday main event. Not quite as exciting as last week when we had the cage match between VTBs and AFS. But maybe we're going to talk joint ventures today in our group, which is Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Group. We like to talk about all things real estate. My wife Donna and I put on courses all about creative real estate, agreements for sale, rent to own, fix and flip, joint ventures, wholesaling. Haven't had a live event for a while, but when we do these hour-long events on Mondays, we can give you a little bit of an overview of a strategy and what's going on, but it's not like being at an all-day event. We do have home study kits available for people who want to get going, which are videos of the live event, and they're pretty darn good if I do say so myself. So that's for anybody who wants to increase their educational component a little bit. And when we do those events, we have great participation from our focus team leaders. Today, we've got with us Andrea Workington, who is an all-star investor located in lovely Red Deer, Alberta. Andrea is a property manager licensed. She's a realtor licensed. She's a joint venturer. She's an entrepreneur. She does a ton of things and is renowned for her ability to tell people in a simple, straightforward way that they understand and then they can take action on. So that's Andrea is going to be with us today, along with Neil Taniguchi. Neil is Mr. Smooth. He's like, listening to Neil is like, I don't know, putting on a warm coat or having a cup of hot cocoa. He just makes you feel good. He's just lovely at explaining how things work and really getting people to understand how a deal works and getting them to perhaps see it his way. Done lots and lots of deals like Andrea. They've done tons of creative real estate deals, which brings us to Wayne Hillier. Wayne doesn't have quite as much experience as Andrea and Neil, but he's got a lot. He's plugged in full-time to real estate. He's got a podcast. He's got a radio show. He does retreats. He's thinking all the time. He loves math. He plays great guitar. And he's also here to help us today with our session on joint ventures. So let's bring everybody in.
I wouldn't say great at guitar.
Oh, well, I mean, what should I say? He used to be pretty good, but he's lost his chops. Now he just displays his guitars. And so I think he's getting back into it, folks, but I don't really know where he's at.
I'll just stick to real estate.
It's way better. Come on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Aren't you a pretty good guitar player?
I plucked a few strings in my time.
Ooh. That took a minute. Process that. What did you do to those strings? All right. So joint ventures. What, Donna? Donna's giving me a hard time in the corner here. So joint ventures, by way of background, you can only buy so many properties on your own, unless you're Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or one of those guys who have endless sums of money. The rest of us run out of qualification room with lenders who have tightened up their lending requirements any number of times in the last 10 or 12 years, so that it's tougher and tougher to get a mortgage. You may not have down payment money, but sooner or later, most of us run out of money. And so what do we turn to? We turn to joint ventures. We turn to putting our experience. Most of us turn to putting our experience that we've already gained by purchasing a few properties into being the finder, the person on the ground, the person who finds the deal. And then you are looking for someone who has money and no experience, usually, and looking for them to put up the money, and you put up the expertise and you purchase a property together. Is kind of a rough summary of what a joint venture is all about. But easy to say that, joint venture. Okay, so that's the thing. Then you need something to cover it. You need a contract. I'm a lawyer. I believe in paper. You need a contract. You need a joint venture agreement. And those agreements can be I've seen them as little as 2 or 3 pages long, which doesn't cover very much. And I'm not recommending something written on a napkin, up to things that are kind of overkill where there's, 40 or 50 pages long. That's quite a bit. But nevertheless, you need an agreement. And the question comes up all the time. How should we structure our joint venture? How should we structure it? There's lots and lots of questions that come up. So we've taken some suggestions from not only Focus Team, but other group members who have written in, and I've come up with a couple myself. Don has come up with some. And so we're going to talk about some of the things. We can't talk about all things in an agreement that might have 50 things to talk about. We can't talk about them all today, but we can talk about some of the important ones. And the one thing that comes up all the time, every time, from everyone is, okay, I'm doing my joint venture. There's going to be percentages. Who gets what in a joint venture? Is it the classic 50-50 joint venture where, the person who has no money probably finds the property and they do the diligence and they organize contractors and they do a ton of different things? That's lots and lots and lots to do. And the person with the money may not do anything more than put up the money. And so how do you split up the profit and the cash flow and the responsibilities in a joint venture? What are the percentages and how do you look at it? So let's start with Wayne on this one. Let's start with what Neil Taniguchi calls the junior Focus Team leader. I don't know if that...
I'll be in this for 30 years. You still call me the junior.
No, we agreed last time you're the junior until some other person comes along more junior than you, Wayne. Now, we talked about this.
What was your question?
Percentages. When you're talking joint ventures, how do you split it up? You've done joint ventures. How do you figure out who gets what in a 2-person joint venture deal?
Well, Barry, it depends. It's the classic example you gave is normally there's a real estate expert and there is a money partner. The money partner is typically the person that just wants to invest, doesn't want to touch any of it, hands off. The expert is the one that has the team, that has the expertise, that has the deal, has everything all set up, and then they take care of everything. In that normal scenario, it's 50% for the expert, 50% for the person that's bringing financing and the funds. Okay. If you want to complicate it and then people start splitting management and one person's going to carry the mortgage, one person's going to carry money, then they start divvying it up. It really depends. If one person might be doing the renovations at cost, or renovations for free labor, then that will adjust it slightly as well. Everything is negotiable.
Good point. Everything is definitely negotiable. And before we toss in any more thoughts, Andrew, do you have a general comment on how do you split those percentages?
Well, Barry, for many years, I've done 50-50. It's very rare that I've not done 50-50, but now with my additional realtor status, I find that some of my savvier joint venture partners are like, hold on a second, you're getting paid when we buy this house, and you're going to get paid again when we sell it, if we're doing a flip, for example. So in that case, I'm a little more flexible to adjust the numbers. So
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And that's fair. I mean, that's another financial component to enter into the negotiations. If as a realtor you're earning commission coming and going, well, that's a fair thing to factor in, isn't it?
I would argue that one. I would argue with that one like hell. Fine, we'll just get some other realtor to do it if that's the case. I'm still getting my 50%.
Well, I've only had one business partner put that to me. So I'm just saying, like, if that's the difference that makes a person from saying yes, I'm a little bit flexible on that. That's all.
Yeah. All right. So on the negotiating side, I think what's the most difficult for folks who are entering into their first joint venture or first couple of joint ventures is that they're like always when you're doing something new, they're a little bit afraid of the process and of the what they've put together and the how successful it's going to be and do I really know what I'm doing? And so that that part of it I think enters into it more when folks are just starting out, and maybe on both sides. But I've seen a number of circumstances where once people had done a few joint ventures and really got the hang of it and were good at it, once they were able to develop a list of people who were interested in hearing about their joint venture opportunities, once they were able to put together a few sets of pro formas that said, okay, so this is what we predicted on this. This is how we set this one up. This is what we predicted. And as you can see from these numbers for this joint venture already in progress, we're doing so much better than we said we were going to. And once you develop that kind of expertise, it's easier for the money partner to say, you remember when we first talked? One of the things you were interested in was getting a better return on your money. You had money in some mutual funds, you had some money in some stocks that didn't work out, and some that did. But overall, your return was 4.5%. And do you remember when we talked about what your cash on cash return was going to be in this joint venture? And we said it was going to be, I think you were going to get about an 11.5% return on your cash on cash return. And as it turned out, because we're pretty conservative, it turns out to be 15%. And which is, at least 10% better. So you're getting now a 15% return on your money from our relationship, which, as you know from experience, I know what I'm doing and I produce good results. So for these future joint ventures that we're doing, I'm kind of bumping up my percentage. I'm moving it up to 60-40 because guess what?
Because you're worth it.
You're doing well. So you can start to move your joint venture percentages in that direction when you're really good at it. Don't go home and say, Barry said I can get 60% all day long, no trouble. Because I didn't say that. Once you get good at it, and if you're of a mind to, you can use that in your negotiations to see if you can get a little bit of a better percentage for yourself. If you've got lots of people and people lined up, and if your joint ventures take 1 hour for somebody to say, I'll take it, then that gives you a much bigger negotiating position. So that's, another little take on it. Any thoughts on that, Andrea?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people worry about when you're the working partner, like what's your value to the person with the money? And I think actually money is way easier to find than good deals are. And so when you look at the return on investment that you're offering people, it's always best to be conservative and to, dial it back a little bit, especially if you're new to doing pro formas and you're talking to people who have no financial background at all. Like if you're telling them they're going to make 18%, they're going to think that they're doing something illegal. And so if you can say something like, well, the average return might be 8% a year, although that may seem low to other real estate investors, to somebody who has no knowledge of anything financial, even that they might think is too high when they're getting 1% or less at the bank. Yeah. So I think part of it's knowing your audience. What are the hot spots for them? Like I noticed somebody in the chat said, what about property management if you're, got that hired out? Well, you still have to manage the manager. The fact that you're not doing the property management doesn't really matter so much. I mean, if it's built into your calculations, that's fantastic. And if you don't have to do it yourself and you can hire somebody who will do a better job than you ever would because you don't have the experience or the knowledge, or you don't live close to the property. Business decision. So don't like put yourself down if you're thinking, well, I'm not actually doing the day-to-day property management. It's okay. Look at this as a business and kind of figure out what you're good at.
Mhm.
All right. So we've answered Cheryl's question, I think. Let's answer Christian Arturo Caíña's question. What about for new investor approaching potential JV partner? How would you structure the percentages if the new investor has no real world experience to call themselves an expert? Whoa. So Christian, that's a toughie, but it's a good question, but it's a tough proposition to approach a potential JV partner when you have no experience. I mean, our scenarios that we talked about previously were you've bought a few properties to the point where you can't buy any more because you can't qualify for any more mortgages.
Mm-hmm.
If you're coming along to say, I haven't ever done a deal, that's a much harder sell. So, I don't know what to say about that. Wayne, what do you think?
Well, Neil, you're pretty new to investing, aren't you?
Yes, I am. In fact, I can't even spell investing.
Oh, it's confidence and trust.
Yeah.
If they trust you and you walk in there with confidence, they won't ask you how many deals you've done, right? So, but kind of like what Andre said earlier, sometimes you might have to take a smaller percentage just to get a deal done. If they say 30% and they get 70%, take it. Get a deal done. At least you're going to get more experience. You might have to take a little less percentage in the beginning to get your feet wet and to get that experience that you can leverage on your future deals. But confidence and building trust is huge. Show people that you are watching this right now. You know what I mean? If you're constantly sharing on social media that you are watching Barry McGuire's, JV structures, and I was at this webinar, I was at that boot camp. People will see that you're doing things, and that'll help build trust.
Yeah, I think that's confidence and trust. Yeah, if you're just starting out and you haven't done one before, you have to get a fair bit of education on how real estate works and how lots of aspects of a real estate deal are put together, and how a joint venture works, and how property management works, and how you handle tenants. And so you got to do a whole whack of work so you can approach and so you can project some confidence. If you just have some vague idea that you'd like to do the deal and you've heard it's great, well, it's going to be hard to project confidence in that situation.
Yeah.
Now,
can I add a comment to that, though?
Yes, you can.
I think that whenever we're doing something new, whether it's, joint venturing in real estate, or like, for example, if I was a lawyer, maybe not like Barry, but if I was a lawyer and I was taking on my first client, it's kind of the same thing. Whatever industry you're in, there's always going to be a first. You just got to pop that cherry and you gotta do your first, right?
Yeah,
and so I think that, approaching friends and family might be easier as long as they're supportive, right? So I think about my first joint venture partner was my uncle. And so he had money, he knew about real estate, but just didn't have the time to invest. And so he became my first joint venture partner, and we had a property for many years that we actually just sold. So there's lots of opportunity. And I think that just because it's your first, you shouldn't let that stop you from moving forward.
Yeah. You got to do one damn deal.
Got to do one. The other thing that goes with that is that, people, I can say to people now, because I'm a grizzled veteran, years later, that says, hey, if I don't know the answer to your question, I do bet you that I can find out within 2 or 3 text, emails, or phone calls what you are looking for. And I see no reason why someone who's brand new wouldn't be able to say this and leverage this group, right? I belong to a group of real estate investors who collectively have done hundreds, if not thousands, of joint ventures. And yes, there are going to be some questions that I can't give you the answer to today, folks. Again, in that trust building, the last thing you ever want to do is start using baffle gab and BSing people because you think you can just snow them under with the answer. Just say, you know what, Wayne, that's a great question. Let me do some research. If I don't have an answer for you right now, which I don't, I'm pretty confident I can get you that answer within the group that I belong to in this period of time, because man, the experience and the people who want to help and say, yeah, let me know what's going on, leverage the group to, it's that association of credibility that you have by being a member of a group like this, where you say there are literally hundreds, if not thousands of these deals that have been done. And, we used to say in sales training to all the newbies, tell your clients, I'm new here. They're going to figure it out here anyways. So you might as well not try and dance around it. And of course, in automotive, they'd say, well, that's a load of crap, Neil. You sold me in the last 3 cars and 3 leases for the last 9 years. So you're not really new here anymore. Darn it.
That's funny. That's funny. So getting back to Christian, he has a little further comment, says, I mean, if you're looking to go from residential to commercial, I think most of those comments apply. But if you've got some residential experience, that would be helpful moving yourself over to commercial. And I mean, you can't go wrong sticking to the classic 50-50. That's what a lot of people like to hear. So along with all the other comments, you can pick whatever you want, but 50-50 usually is fairly well received, I would say.
I know there's a ton of experienced investors in here that all went through the exact same problem when they got first started. So if you're an experienced investor, share in the comments what yours was when you first got started. How did you show, that you knew what you were doing? What was your percentage?
That's a good one to hear. Sean says, if you can get one deal done by yourself and get it to be performing, sell a share in that performing property and use some cash for another deal. That's one of the good things about joint ventures is you can extract some of the money in it by you've done it yourself and get it performing. That's so much easier to show to somebody instead of saying, here's what I think I can do. Say, here's what I have done. And would you like a share of it at a 50-50 split? Wow. All right. So we've got a whole whack of things to talk about, but I don't like to pass by questions. Wayne, are there any more questions we should be answering?
Yes. I haven't read this, though.
All right. What is it? A JV partnership where the initial profit of the investment is it pay back the initial capital. Then as the working partner, we pay back whatever capital investment. And when that is complete, we're doing a 50-50. We're doing the property management, no charge. But should we think of negotiating cost at that time of the capital investment has been paid back? Wow.
So I think we should do negotiating costs for that at the time of the capital.
Read it out.
That's a big one.
People
A clarifying question on there, I think. Is the initial profit mean like you're buying the property and doing some reno in there and refinancing to raise the value? Because otherwise, where's the initial profit? Where's the lift coming that creates profit in this?
Yeah. I'm just not quite sure what we're here.
See if we haven't got a clarification yet.
Well, we can come back to that if we could.
Yeah. If you could clarify, then we'll pop that question back up. The way that I read it, and I'm skimming through just like you guys are, I just assume that I think that all cash flow and any funds that they pull out of the deal, it pays back the initial investment first before they split the funds. That's how I read it.
the initial profit.
Yeah. That's kind of what I think.
He says the initial profit.
The initial profits is from the
Short-term
STO,
rental?
short-term rental that we are doing.
Okay, so cash flow probably.
Cash flow. Okay. Well, it's pretty classic that the initial profit, however generated, goes to paying back capital, but it doesn't have to be, It doesn't have to be. You could you could agree that the cash flow from short-term rentals is distributed between the parties, and you leave payback of the initial capital till the end of the deal, because as Wayne said, it all depends. It's what you negotiate. It's what you negotiate.
Yeah.
Cash calls. Let's move on to cash calls, which is kind of related to this. So cash calls, everybody, are a circumstance where you set up your joint venture. Enough money is put in by the parties to acquire, and then somewhere down the road, you need more money. A roof goes, a hot water tank goes, something happens where your reserve fund probably doesn't support the amount of cash you need to do something, and so you have to make a cash call. Any joint venture agreement should talk about, if we need to make a cash call, who's coming up with the money. So again, I mean, I think the answer is it depends. Maybe we can talk about some examples that we've seen of how the cash call question has been set out. Apart from, okay, if there's a cash call, we each have to contribute to the cash call as in our ownership percentages. So if we need $5,000 and it's a 50-50 deal, each party would have to come up with $2,500. So that is, again, a classic way to sort out cash calls. Who's seen a different way?
Most of mine are that the money partner is responsible for cash calls. Pretty standard. I have one joint venture partner that was his big thing, that he wasn't certain. He didn't feel good enough that, why am I responsible for the cash calls? If you tell me that this is all going to work, and don't worry, and there's a reserve fund in place that I'm putting up, why am I responsible for a cash call after that? Because that would be something that you did wrong. You didn't properly have it filled. You didn't, make sure you had good tenants in there. So anything like that, worst case scenario, would be your fault. So I actually agreed with him. It was a brand new property. I made him put 4 months worth of reserve, 4 months worth of expenses in the reserve. And I said, that's a pretty good point. That was his one thing that prevented him from doing the deal. So I said, you know what? You're right. If it got to that would probably be my negligence. So I wrote it in that I would be responsible for cash calls on that one to get the deal done. It was a really great deal.
Okay.
I think that's a great point, Wayne, that you definitely, when you're setting up a joint venture and making the presentation, it's not just about covering the down payment, the legal fees, and appraisals and little things like that, but to have that initial staying power fund, 90 days, 120 days. I've even seen some at 180. We've never done 180, but I've heard of people who they're comfortable when they have 6 months of expenses in the till, so to speak, and that money has to come from somewhere. Yeah. And I've heard of joint ventures like where you're right, the operating partner, the finder, is the one who says, no, I'll cover all of that as a way to, or like Barry says, there's a split. So you're the first guy I've ever heard where you tell the money partners they're responsible for putting it up. So that tells you the scale is from 0 to 100, 100 to 0. And it really is. They're all just points of discussion, but they need to be in the agreement, because if you never have a cash call, it doesn't matter. But the day you have a cash call, and let's say that it says that it should be 50-50, like in Barry's example, and one of the parties says, I don't have the money. So then the joint venture agreement, then I'm sure, Barry, you can elaborate on this, needs to say that if we need to put in 10 grand and it's 5 grand and 5 grand, and party B doesn't put in their 5 grand, how does that then affect the split? Because there should be some compensation on the split to the joint venture for not performing as a partner.
Yes, and properly drafted joint venture agreement will talk about that specific point. And there are any number of ways of sorting out what you do when one of the joint venture partners can't put up their, say, for example, 50% of the cash call. Their percentage in the joint venture can be reduced using formulas to set it out very clearly at the beginning that if you don't come up with your share, your percentage will be reduced. And here's how we're going to figure that out. Sometimes those clauses also penalize the person who isn't coming up. It's not just you limit down some of your percentage and you tie in the number that they were supposed to come up with. Sometimes there's a pluck it off the wall penalty percentage that's also applied. So, as Neil pointed out, it's from 0 to 100% and 100% to 0 in terms of who comes up with cash call money. But you got to discuss it. You got to discuss it and discuss it in detail. So that's cash calls. Any other comments on cash calls? And do we have any in the chat?
I think
so.
there was one.
I would hope that a contingency fund was set up before doing a cash call. Can you negotiate the contingency fund? Well, Wayne, let's go back to you. You're big on contingency funds, staying power funds, as Neil calls it.
Yeah, I want as much as possible. I want my money partner to put as much in there as possible. Just it's a safety net. Minimum 3 months. And then every month, obviously, cash flow helps replenish it because over time it will deplete. And part of the negotiation, part of the whole, doing the JV worksheet before we do a joint venture, we talk about cash reserves. What do we want the cash reserve to be to start with? What is the threshold that we want it to stay above? What happens when it goes below that number? And what is the minimum that we will have the reserve at? And at what point do we need to put money in? So there's what it starts with. There's that threshold of what it needs to stay above. And then once you go below that, typically you put more of your cash flow into it to bring it above it. And then what's the minimum that would require a cash call from whoever's responsible for it?
There's a nugget in that, folks, that says if your reserve fund falls below a certain amount, did you hear what Wayne said? That he's going to basically close down cash flow and not have the JV payout until that reserve fund has been replenished, which avoids a cash call. Yeah. So again, stuff to be written into your agreement. That's really, really great advice.
And for folks who are just starting out, if it seems like you're asking your money partner for money for this and money for that, and you always have your hand out asking for money, part of what money partners appreciate, I believe, is that you are taking a conservative approach to the joint venture, that you really want to set it up nicely at the beginning to allow for worst case scenarios, to allow for super performance of the property without having to come back to your money partner and say, you know what, gee, I was a little optimistic about the fill in the blank. And sorry, you got to come up with some more money. So that's, I believe in the undersell and over deliver, and you can do it at the beginning. It's so much easier right when you're starting out, as you set out who you are in the joint venture side of things. And a conservative, we're going to make this work approach, I think, is received well by your money partners. Okay, I think we've done that one. Let's move on to the buy-sell, or as it's sometimes called, the shotgun clause. The shotgun clause. These can be, well, what are we talking about here? This is the notion that as much as you get into a joint venture, maybe there's a point in time where you want to get out of the joint venture. You might say to your joint venture partner, listen, we're going to set this up with a review date of 5 years from now. We're not saying we're getting out of it then, because that's a bit offside how joint ventures should be drafted, but we're going to have a review date. And that's when we can talk about what else we might want to do. But people change their minds about what they're doing. Sometimes people want to get out. And so the buy-sell provision in a joint venture is a clause that would allow typically one party to offer to buy out the other party. you you don't want to be partners with this person anymore, so you offer to buy him out, or you offer to sell your share in the joint venture to the party that you don't want to be in bed with anymore. I mean, either way, you're looking to get out. So overall, joint ventures need to discuss, what if one of us wants to get out of this deal? How are we going to manage that? Are we going to allow that? Or are we specifically saying, if you're in, and you're not out until there's some other clause in the agreement that lets you out? But if you want to at least have a possibility of considering how you get out, then you have a buy-sell clause. And who wants to take a crack at the shotgun side of it? Neil, what's the shotgun side of a buy-sell?
Basically, it suggests that if party A is the person who's approaching party B for the buyout, a shotgun clause gives party B full rights to say, okay, you wanted to buy me out on this property based on $400,000 purchase price. So A is buying out B. Shotgun says, B goes, no problem, we're going to buy this out, but I have the right fully written in this agreement to buy you out, even though you proposed it. So you can turn it around, and quite frankly, it prevents someone from trying to take advantage, lowball the partner to get out in a situation. So if that property is worth $500,000 and they're offering you $400,000 for it, and it's written in your agreement, you go, yeah, I like that price. Other than the fact that it's not the way you thought, we're going the other way.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it around on you. I'm going to turn around you. I'm going to buy you out. How do you like them apples? Actually, you don't say that. Well, maybe you do. Maybe
I hope it never comes to that, though.
Well, of course, you hope it never comes to it, but that's why you need it in the agreement, because if it does come to it, you need something.
Sometimes it may not even be a lowball situation. It could be that the property is worth $5, and someone says, well, if we look at commissions and this and that and everything, well, what about $480? And they're actually making you a fair offer. But what if it's a really good asset? So it may not even be to prevent lowball. It could just be that to make sure that a fair price gets established. But you want to probably have some discussions that says, we're thinking about this. What do you think? Before you just go and go, here's your offer.
Yeah.
Right. Communication again.
Communication. As Neil said, I mean, you want to have this kind of a clause so that one party can't take advantage of the other party. But even if you have this kind of clause, one of the things that can happen, and you have to think about this, is if the parties are of unequal economic strength, the party who has the economic strength can make the lowball offer, believing that the other party won't be able to turn it around on them. So if it's worth $500,000 and the offer is at $4, the guy with the economic strength says, "I'm going to offer $4," and this poor schmo will never be able to come up with the money to buy me out. He'll never be able to shotgun me on this. So that's something that can come up, but kind of fits with maybe Cheryl's question about, can the person who wants to stay in get another JV partner to get the money to buy out the person leaving? So these kinds of clauses are really quite tricky. They end up being often, close to a full page of sort of dense legal whereases and heretofores, and if you do this, then I get to do that. And so, can you find someone to help you out? Well, I mean, if that person can put up money and if you can meet the terms of the buy-sell clause, then yeah, you could find somebody else to help replace the person who wants to leave. But again, joint venture agreements you need to look at your list of 50 things that could be in the joint venture agreement and say, okay, buy, sell. Do we want to have a clause that allows an exit, allows one party to try and buy out the other party? And do we want it to, how do we want it to be structured? So buy, sell clauses are important. They don't come up too often, but as Neil said, on the cash call side of it, you don't need the clause till you need the clause. So that's one of the reasons that joint venture agreements get to be usually of substantial length. If people are really going over the things that could be in there and kind of going through the scenarios. So that is, anybody else on buy sell? Are we good? Once, twice, gone. Cash reserves. I think we talked about cash reserves in cash calls. Pardon me, Donna? Pardon me?
Is this one answered from the person?
Oh, yes, we answered Cheryl's question. Donna's monitoring me from another computer, making sure that I'm cutting the mustard here.
Cattle.
I was just writing a comment right now. It still blows my mind every Monday that literally we're having these discussions for free right now. Like, just even 3, 4, 5 years ago, none of this was here. And like, you had to go to an event to get this kind of information. It blows my mind that we're doing all this for free. It's amazing. It
is kind of amazing. And of course, even though we are doing all this for free, I mean, there's lots more to it than what we're talking about on a day like this. But really, it is a good leg up for lots of people just to hear about some of these concepts and to hear people who have been through the investing mill talk about how it seemed to them and what they've done. So it's really a real add-on, I think, to some of the courses that we do and to other educational avenues that people can explore. So, yeah. Distribution of cash flow. We didn't talk about that. And I guess maybe the point there is if you're doing a 50-50 joint venture, does that mean the cash flow gets distributed 50-50? Does it mean that cash flow is going to go to pay back initial financial contributions before the working partner would get any money? Who's got to give us some scenarios on the distribution of cash flow side of things?
I'll chat about that. So one of the things that's important to me is to know my joint venture partner, what their expectations are and whether they actually need that cash or not. Because if we have the opportunity to put it into an extra reserve fund, or if we know that sooner than later we may have to change a roof or something like that, I like to be proactive and keep that money in the account. So for the most part, I don't pay out any money. It just sits and builds in the account, for those larger ticket items. And then if we get above a certain dollar value and there's nothing coming, then we do a payout.
All right. So your go-to position, Andrea, is we don't do distributions. We save it and save it and save it. And at a point in time, we think about whether we're covered solidly enough. And if so, we'll do a sort of a special distribution.
Yes.
Kind of like that. I like that. That
I'll
helps.
piggyback that a little bit, Barry, that the very first joint venture that we set up, again, we didn't know, and we just lucked out. In those days, you could get 100%, 80% loan to value HELOC on the property. So we took an entire line of credit against this house. And at the time, the other couple, they said exactly what Andrea had said. We don't need the cash flow today. We're okay. They had put the money in from a line of credit of theirs for the down payment. And so we said, well, why don't we do this, folks? We'll take every last nickel of excess cash flow, and we're just going to slam it against that line of credit against the house and drive it down, which will drop the interest over time, and this thing will be paid off sooner. And everyone went, hey, great. Well, that was 2008, Yamo. So fast forward this now to about a year or two ago, and the situation's changed. You may have heard me talk about this previously. Unfortunately, her husband got killed in a car accident, tragic thing, at a truck stop, blah, blah, blah. I won't go into the details. And they were both working, but he was certainly the majority breadwinner in the family. So we now have a joint venture that has all of this equity built into the line of credit. So now the joint venture is able to pay out big chunks equally to both of that money. The distributions, the special distribution we're talking about, helped her get back, on a better footing, and now has the ability, we can tweak it one more time once we once we have an exact idea of where she stands, to actually have a monthly distribution for her, because that now becomes important to her.
That's it's so interesting how like you said, Neil, you kind of lucked out on that one. But there's a couple things come out of that, is that for anybody who's listening, a feature of what we talk about in this group is the notion of win-win. We're always looking to do the best we can for ourselves and for our other party, whether it's someone on the other side of acquiring a property or whether it's for our joint venture partner. You're always looking to turn things into win-win. We never take advantage. We want to help out. And the second thing that comes out of that is from Andrea's comment, and that is that she talks to her joint venture partners about what they need and what they want. And I think a lot of answers to the questions we've been discussing here today come from having really solid conversations with your joint venture partner to see, what they're comfortable with, what their fears are, what they're looking to do, short, medium, and long term, why they want to do something with you. And you'll get a flavor. You'll get the flavor of who they are and what they want. And that will lead you to suggest how the joint venture should be set up. And you'll be, if you can, setting it up in a way that meets the requirements of your money partner. You'll address their concerns and their fears and what they're looking to get out of it, and do it all in the best win-win way that you can. So doing a lot of listening is important in any situation, and it's especially important in joint ventures. Got to listen. Yeah. How about, let's move on to the exit and renewal. So one of the things about joint ventures, in order to meet some of the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA tests on exactly what kind of a deal you are in, I think what we're looking to do, all of us, is to have our deals described as a place where there will be capital gains as opposed to business investment income taxed at different rates. I think one of the things to get a capital gain treatment is that you're not supposed to say in your joint venture, this is a 5-year deal, and at the end of 5 years, we are selling the property, and we'll see how it works out at that time. I'm not a tax guy, but we're talking now about what should you do for talking to your joint venture partner about how long the joint venture is going to go on for. Maybe it's a 25-year amortization, so this is a 25-year joint venture. I think, yeah. So, Andrea, let's go back to you. What do you say to your folks about the timing on your joint ventures?
Well, I think being in Alberta has taught us something, that sometimes over 10 years, the property values don't really change. So thank goodness for mortgage pay down. So I think it's really important to know, well, if you're doing a long-term buy and hold, it might be better to say not 5 years, but 10 years is maybe a more realistic time frame to at least get something. It's different, obviously, if you're doing a renovation flip, then, it's a much shorter time period. Or if you're doing a rent to own contract, it could be 1, 2, or 3 years as an example. So I think it's important for people to understand what their time commitment is to you and to the deal.
Okay. Neil?
The majority of our joint ventures are structured, and I'll say are more like were. We haven't done a whole lot lately, but when we were in that gap, so to speak, between qualifying on our own and then getting corporate financing, where we were doing joint ventures, the majority of them were for an intended rent-to-own exit, which then meant that the time frame was defined by the sale, the sale of the house to the tenant ultimately. So it kind of had a baked in end date on them. We have only ever done one buy and hold joint venture. So
Yeah.
and we're the capital partner on a multifamily unit in Edmonton, and that one I believe we'll look at it in 10 years, because certainly the 5 years, it was too early to consider that there'd be any significant return in that amount of time.
Yeah, the circumstances certainly change provincially. Here in Alberta, we've got some of these longer time frames. Other places where things are rocketing up, you might have to deal with somebody who says, I know, but it's up 75% in the 18 months that we've owned it. Let's get our cash and get out of here. So, it's obviously different for different scenarios in different provinces. But that, again, is something that you need to talk about. I think at the minimum, if you're looking for capital gain treatment, although you might not have an end date in your joint venture agreement, you might have a review date. And then you might also talk about, what we do then. What are we going to do? If we're reviewing it in 5 years, on what basis might we go forward? What are we going to talk about? That one can be a little softer, I think. A bit softer. Wayne, before we get a little too close to 6 o'clock, do we have more questions? I know Sean Impey said that if the money partners put up all the money through a HELOC, they might want to be compensated for the day-to-day interest on their HELOC. As the joint venture moves forward. I've seen that a number of times, and it's been an agreed term. Anybody else seen that one?
Yep. On one of my deals, the JV partner is paid his interest first, and then we split the remainder of the cash flow, less maintenance and vacancies. The remainder we split it 50-50.
Okay. And I've seen scenarios where the investor working partner says to the money partner, listen, it's up to you to come up with the money. If you don't happen to have it in a sock and you have to borrow it, well, that's up to you.
Yeah.
You got to put up the money. You pay your own interest. Mm-hmm. So, folks, I hope you're seeing a pattern here. All of these things that we're talking about are negotiable. And if you have a pretty good idea what your joint venture partner wants and what's important to them and what they would like and what would make them feel comfortable, it's easier to figure out the answers to some of these questions, which, as you've heard, can be from one end of the spectrum to the other. There's basically no pat answer for any of these issues or questions we've been talking about. They're all negotiable and they all depend, as Wayne said.
We have a question here, a couple questions.
Here we are. Does the money partner qualify for financing as well, or does JV deals usually mean that the money partner finances the entire property? And how does this relate to holding title? All right, Andrea, what do you say?
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute. So it really depends on the scenario. Obviously, I try to not qualify as much as possible simply because it takes a lot of time and effort for me. And also I pay a higher interest rate. So it really depends on the partnership. And if the person that I'm joint venturing can qualify or not. If they can't, then oftentimes I will. But it's, I'm open to both, just depending on the scenario. So I don't typically jointly qualify, I guess is the other part of that. I don't jointly qualify with people. Either it's me or it's them.
All right. And depending on who qualified, that's the person that goes on title. Mm-hmm. They're holding the title. Doesn't mean the person who didn't qualify can't have an interest put against the title. Caveat in Alberta does that, and various forms of notice in other provinces allow your joint venture interest to be registered. You have to talk to your mortgage broker about that side of it, because some lenders want to know if there's any third-party beneficial non-title interests, as they say. Sometimes lenders don't like that, so you have to be aware that that's one of the things that needs to be discussed. But it seems to me that most often it is the money partner who's doing the qualifying for the financing, and they often not only qualify for the mortgage, they also put up all the money. But there are other versions of that. Sometimes the money partner only qualifies for the financing, and the other partner puts up all the cash, or they share some of that. There really are as many ways to split that financial pie as there are people doing joint venture deals. What does Doug say? If the money partner is getting the mortgage, do you advise them on the terms of the joint venture, Doug? No.
One word answer, yes.
Yes.
There you are. Okay, that answers
If you're an
that
expert.
You don't
Yeah.
want someone to lock into a 5-year fixed term. If there's a chance, again, in our world, that the property gets sold in 2 and you're faced with a $15,000 payout penalty.
one.
So
Mhm.
yeah, a 5-year fixed term might work perfectly for a buy and hold, where you agree with people that that's the way you're going to go. Although, again, this is where Sean would weigh in and say, well, perhaps in the long run, 80+% of the time, 5-year variable is a better way to go. And then it gives you the option, if you wanted to collapse that joint venture sooner, that your payout penalty is only ever going to be a 3-month penalty on variable. So we love variable close.
Yeah, all minor variables. All right, let's pop up another question there, Wayne. Does the caveat indicate a percentage? It can, but it doesn't have to. So when you file a caveat here in Alberta for a joint venture, it can say something as simply as this: Party A claims a beneficial interest as a purchaser under a joint venture agreement. And that's all it has to say. It doesn't have to give a percentage. And although you can tack a copy of the joint venture agreement to the caveat, you don't have to do that. And I wouldn't recommend adding your joint venture, because that's a public document. Just file your caveat if that's what you want to do, claim your interest, and that's how you do it. Next up, as the working partner, do we put a caveat on the title as we have a 50% interest on the place that was purchased? They would be on title as they are the qualifying partner. So as the working partner, the expert, it's your choice about whether or not you want to file the caveat here in Alberta or some form of notice in other provinces. You don't have to, but as we said in the previous answer, I like it that you just claim that you have an interest undefined. You have an undefined interest in the property, and that's what goes on the title. Your purpose in doing that is to let the public know that you have an interest in the property, and if they do anything with that person who's on the title, they are taking it subject to your interest. I think you don't really have to worry about the percentages, because that should be carefully set out in your written joint venture agreement.
Just going through the rest of the questions, a lot of it's been kind of answered. So
Okay.
There is one last one about the Smith maneuver.
What does Iris
A
say?
mortgage question.
Working better for owner, permanent resident sales, but not for investment properties, commercial
Sean
properties.
is online. He can answer that one.
You know what, Irina? Sean Impey, Ace mortgage broker and certified Smith maneuver guy, is online, and I think Sean would be better to answer that than us. I'd be taking a stab at it, but Sean will be able to tell you exactly. So we'll leave you and Sean to talk about that one.
I reckon that's it. I think well, Doug had one last question. Accounting question.
Do you utilize capital depreciation? Well, do you?
No,
Neil? No?
Short answer.
I don't. I don't.
I'd have to ask my assistant. I don't know if we do.
Neil?
When I say it depends, really, we did back in the day when I was still working my job. We took depreciation to reduce my rental income down, so I stayed out of a tax bracket. So, without being an accountant, so it's always that speak to your accountant first, folks. Caveat that goes with any of this discussion, but when you take depreciation, you are getting what is akin to an interest-free loan from the government because those taxes are deferred. When you go to dispose of the property, there is the recapture, so you will pay it someday. And the other way that it was illustrated to me is in that particular case, when you're taking depreciation, you are baking yourself a very large Christmas turkey, which someday comes home and needs to come to roost and be dealt with. So we have chosen since then, the only property that I take depreciation on today is a leftover white elephant commercial condo that I have that it's on my books for like thousands over market value. So I'm going to keep writing it down every year by my maximum 4% to try and bring it closer to ground or to rather than back to ground versus being underwater.
All right. All right, folks. Well, I see a finger. Oh, it's the right one. Okay. Yeah.
One last question.
Okay. Isn't it better to hold the JV'd property in a corp to keep it separate from personal? Which goes to the age-old, ever-present, most asked question.
Is it?
In real estate investing, should I hold properties in a corporation or should I keep it personal? And the short answer to that, folks, is that you always start with your accountant and let them hear what you're going to do, what you think you're going to do in the real estate investing world. They should know who you are already and probably should have some idea of what your plans are and where your money comes from. And they are the best person to have that initial conversation with. Once you sort that out with your accountant, then the structure gets, if you're choosing to have a corporate structure, then the accountant and the lawyer work together to set that up. So that's the answer to that one.
Were you kind of saying that the accountant is more important than the lawyer?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't give 2 cents for those squints. Come on, being kind. Hey,
It's
listen.
actually, there's an interesting thing.
They're essential guys. I love my accountant, but they have a position in this real estate world, and you gotta give them their due. All right, everyone.
Good.
Thanks for showing up, Andrea. It's always fun. Wayne, Neil, and thanks everyone for coming in on a Monday and asking those great questions. And we'll see you next Monday. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Bye.